some breaking news today from the highest court in the U.S. Justice Stephen Breyer reportedly plans to retire from the Supreme Court,
which would allow the Biden administration to put forth its first nominee. So for more on what's next, let's bring in Kimberly Robinson. She is Bloomberg Law's Supreme Court reporter. Kimberly joins us live from Arlington, Virginia. Kimberly, Breyer is 83 years old, so that makes him the oldest justice. So it's not a total surprise that he's stepping down. What can you tell us about the timeline for his exit and his replacement?
Well, the timeline has shifted a little bit. So prior to the last Supreme Court confirmation hearings generally took several months from when the retirement was announced to when a successor was confirmed. But of course, after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Senate Republicans pushed through Amy Coney Barrett at a rocket speed. And so that timeline went down to about a month. So certainly we could see some pretty quick movement on this, although we don't have to. I suspect the game plan for Democrats and for the White House is to get this nomination done before the midterm elections, and they have plenty of time to do that.
And we should note that this is the earliest Supreme Court retirement announcement since the early 90s, giving Biden plenty of time. But Kimberly, I'm curious, could Republicans still potentially step in and derail things at all? And, could some Democrats who are swing voters even potentially derail this timeline?
Right. So we've seen a lot of derailing on some of the Biden administration's key legislative items and some talk over the filibuster, particularly from Senators Manchin and Sinema. Here for Supreme Court nominees, there only needs to be 50 votes. So as long as all Democrats are on board, and there will be the vice president to break a tie. And, we have seen those two senators step out from the Democratic Party on other issues, but on judicial nominations, that's something we've seen them be lockstep with the other Democrats on. And I suspect with something this big and this historic that they will continue to support Biden's judicial nominees.
What about Republicans then? I know you mentioned that you only need 50 votes with the vice president breaking the tie, but is there any way for Republicans in the Senate to derail this, or might we even see some Republican senators perhaps cross party lines and vote with the Democrats?
Well, crossing party lines and voting with Democrats is something that we just don't see anymore. I do think that with President Biden suggesting that he'll nominate the court's first Black woman, that might change the calculus a little bit for some Republicans, though I do think it'll be pretty close to that 50-vote threshold. But again, that's something we'll have to wait and see. I don't think that there's anything procedurally Republicans can do at this point, but former Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has already said that if this nomination is still open after the midterm elections, and if Republicans take over the Senate, that they will block President Biden's nominees. So I'm sure that the White House is working at a pretty quick speed to make sure that doesn't happen.
I'm curious, too, you talked about the filibuster. Another potential shift that's come up for the Biden administration is term limits for Supreme Court justices. Whatever happened to that? Can you update us on that whole dynamic?
Sure. So the president did put in place a Supreme Court commission, and they came out with their findings, but the findings weren't ever intended to be a recommendation. Instead, they were more like a book report, the pros and cons of term limits. And since that's come out, we haven't heard anything from the White House. We don't even have a timeline on, what the Supreme Court or what the White House might do with those recommendations and findings. So far, we're on a holding pattern on those. I will say that, interest groups who watch the Supreme Court still have expanding the court top of mind. But I wonder if having this nominee may kind of bring the temperature down on that issue.
Interesting, especially since there were a lot of groups that were, I wouldn't say picketing, but really pushing the idea that Breyer should step down last summer, and they obviously didn't get anywhere with that at the time. Give us a little bit more of a sense of who Justice Stephen Breyer is, because he's 83. He's been the longest-serving justice at the moment, and I feel like we don't know a whole lot about him.
Well, that's right. And one of the reasons that we don't know a lot about him is that Justice Breyer actually spent 11 years as the court's most junior justice. And so he didn't really write a lot of the bigger cases that we think of when we think of a justice who has served on the Supreme Court this long. Instead, his legacy has really been kind of behind the scenes, creating consensus. So I think that's going to be a big part of his legacy. But another thing is that he's a very pragmatic justice, where a lot of the other justices want to put bright line rules, does the certain issue fall on one side of the line or another. Justice Breyer is a little more wishy-washy and wants to weigh lots of factors. So that's kind of an element I think that will be missing without Justice Breyer on the court. But, and for me personally, one thing that I will miss as a Supreme Court reporter who's in the courtroom a lot is Justice Breyer is just known for his crazy off-the-wall hypotheticals that really make listening to oral arguments interesting. So that's something personally I'm going to be interested in, and I think will also be part of his legacy as well.
Yeah, Kimberly, I'm a huge hypotheticals nerd. This is like the way that my friends and I hang out with each other is just insane hypothetical questions. Walk me through your favorites from Breyer. What are your all-star hypothetical moments that stick out to you?
Well, we actually have a video on this that we did last year when clamor around his retirement came, and it reminded me of some of the funniest ones. He talks about these giant tomatoes that grow into people and then go around destroying cities. And to be honest, I can't even tell you what legal principle that was trying to get at.
I think marijuana laws or something, right?
I think that's right. That sounds about right. We've also seen in products liabilities cases him talk about, ice cream stands that poison their customers. Just really anything and everything you can talk about. He has a really unique way of kind of homing in on the particular legal issue that's bothering him.
What an interesting thinker who would bring up deadly tomato children or, ice cream stands that are deadly. So let's continue with this hypothetical idea. Of course, everyone's going to be wondering who's on the White House's shortlist. And, I think back to episodes of The West Wing where they pull out a list that they've already drawn up and are going through all the names and bring them into the White House to interview them and do all the due diligence. What can you tell us about who is at the top of the list? You mentioned President Biden had promised to nominate a Black woman.
That's right. And I think this is one reason why the process could move along pretty quickly. I think common thinking is that there are two women at the top of the White House's list, although some others who may be kind of vying for an underdog seat. And that's Leandra Kruger, who currently sits as a justice of the California Supreme Court, and federal judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was actually just elevated from the district court in DC to the DC circuit last year. And that's considered one of the second most important federal court in the nation. So that's where we've gotten a lot of our current Supreme Court justices. So that puts her in pretty good company.
Yeah, and apparently Ketanji Brown Jackson was also a former Breyer clerk as well, just to kind of complete that picture.
Absolutely, and carry on that legacy. Kimberly, I want to go back to some potential roadblocks that a Biden nominee could potentially face. If one of the women who you just spoke about is the selected nominee, what do you anticipate being the biggest roadblock that Senate Republicans potentially voice in that confirmation process?
Well, I wonder if it's something around affirmative action. And the reason I say that is because the Supreme Court just this week said that it was going to consider overturning some of its decades-old cases, allowing affirmative action in higher education. So, of course, there are other big ticket items on the Supreme Court's docket this term, abortion and gun rights, but a lot of those will be decided. And so just looking forward at what's coming before the court, I wonder if affirmative action and other racial issues are going to be pretty big on the list that the GOP members of the Senate are going to be asking about and wondering about.
Yeah, that's definitely top of mind. Are we past the point, Kimberly, where a Supreme Court justice's history when it comes to paying for childcare is going to come up? I think of Zoe Baird, who, of course, was nominated by President Clinton, and then ended up having to withdraw her nomination because she had hired undocumented immigrants and failed to pay their Social Security taxes when they were taking care of her children because she was serving as a judge.
Yeah, I think that, one of the reasons that these two people, these two women are on the top of the list are because they have been vetted quite a bit. And so, as I mentioned, Brown Jackson was just confirmed last year. So she already went through a pretty hard confirmation battle and was able to withstand the test. And then Leandra Kruger just has so many of those, boxes that you need to check in order to be on the Supreme Court, and a really tested history as a justice of the California Supreme Court. But I think a lot of those lurking issues are not going to be there with these two really known nominees.
Oh, wait, sorry, my mistake, actually. U.S. Attorney General was the actual position she was nominated for.
Yeah, no, but it's a great point, Scarlett. And Kimberly, I guess I want to ask a very low-level question of you here. If the court is going to continue to be a 6-3 conservative-liberal split, why does it matter what these potential justices think about affirmative action? What's the case there?
Good question.
Yeah, I think you're right. On the bottom line, holding from the Supreme Court, it's not going to make very much of a difference. We already know what Stephen Breyer thinks about affirmative action, and I suspect that's going to be what any Democratic nominee thinks as well. They could have a difference in, the dissenting opinions, and these dissenting opinions are really seen as not speaking to the other justices on the court now, but speaking to the future. And I think that's where these could really have a different kind of a different impact. And also, it could be that, one of these two candidates or any other Black woman that President Biden could nominate to this seat could really add a different perspective for the justices on the Supreme Court. Currently we have two justices on the court who have experience with affirmative action, Justices Sotomayor and Justice Thomas, and they come at it from wildly different views and wildly different experiences, so have an impact the way that the opinions get written, whether they're more narrow or more sweeping, and in particular how the dissents are written for the future.
That's really important, of course, to remember. Kimberly, thank you so much. Kimberly Robinson hopping on with us from Bloomberg Law to give us instant insight into what the Breyer's reported retirement means for the balance of the Supreme Court.